Support for WUWM podcasts comes from Potawatomi Casino Hotel Milwaukee, home to 24/7 excitement, dining, and an on-site hotel at 1721 West Canal Street. More information at potawatomi.com.
Lake Effect brings you conversations about what's happening in Milwaukee and the people, places, and organizations that shape the community. This is Lake Effect Spotlight from WUWM, Milwaukee's NPR.
On Wednesday morning, Milwaukee County Circuit Court Judge Hannah Dugan will have her last hearing before her case potentially goes to trial. Dugan is accused of helping a defendant in her courtroom to evade immigration enforcement officers. The case against Dugan has become a bit of a flashpoint in President Donald Trump's sweeping immigration crackdown. Federal prosecutors have said they're offering Dugan plea deals. Lawyers for Dugan say their client is innocent and will be going to trial next month. To find out more about what could happen next, WUWM's Maayan spoke with Wisconsin criminal defense attorney Tony Cotton, who is not involved in the case.
To remind people about this case, prosecutors say Judge Dugan escorted 31-year-old Eduardo Flores Ruiz and his lawyer out of her courtroom through a back door in April after she learned that ICE agents had arrived to arrest him. Judge Dugan was indicted in May by a federal grand jury on charges of obstruction, a misdemeanor, and concealing an individual to prevent arrest, a felony. Okay, so first I just want to know, big picture, what do you think are the implications of this case?
I think the implications are more professional than anything else because it's one of those situations that could be hard for Judge Dugan to recover from professionally. In terms of consequences in the federal court system, I haven't run her guidelines. Everything is typically, they have a guideline system of sentencing in federal court. So if she were convicted, my guess is that someone like her is going to be, it wouldn't even be a confinement situation given how low level this offense is.
Driving back a little bit to the charges of obstruction and concealing an individual to prevent arrest, what would the government need to prove to convict her?
Well, for obstructing, you have to show that you I hate to use the word, but you have to show that you obstructed law enforcement in some capacity, that you engaged in behavior that made their job more difficult. In terms of concealing a person to prevent their discovery or arrest, that's the same thing. That it's not the same charge, but it's the same concept. The government would have to prove that she acted in a knowing fashion and that she intended to conceal or prevent the immigrant from being apprehended by the authorities.
Okay, so I want to get to the jury and picking the jury in a moment, but what do you see as the strengths and weaknesses of the government's case against her?
The strength of the government's case comes from the video that demonstrates exactly what she did in the hallway. It's a very clear video. You can see exactly what Judge Dugan did. The difficulty the government is going to have is getting a jury, if we think about that, getting a jury to get inside Judge Dugan's head and reach a conclusion about what her intent was. It's always difficult to get, as a prosecutor, it's always difficult to get a jury to understand what a defendant's intent is if they haven't said it.
And how does intent play into the conviction of her?
Because a person has to intend to obstruct the police or law enforcement, and in one of the elements of the crime for the other count is that she has to intend to conceal a person from arrest. So her intent is what the entire case will come down to.
And Dugan has argued that she has done nothing wrong, she did nothing wrong, and that she has complete authority over movement in her courtroom. What do you see as the strengths and weaknesses of her case?
I think she has another very strong argument that I've seen her attorneys try to advance, which is a public authority argument, essentially that Judge Dugan was following chief judge orders on, and I don't know if it's true or not that there was such an order, but essentially she's been claiming that what she was doing was simply following the protocol that had been set forth by the judiciary in Milwaukee County. And
how would that play into defending herself?
Yeah, because if she is, because it goes right to the heart of the intent. If what she was doing was explaining to the agents that there's a different protocol that needs to be followed, and she was permitting the immigrant to use a different door, not to obstruct the police, but to reduce the confrontation in the courtroom, then it would bear on what her intent was. So I think that's why she's trying to advance that argument, is to say, hey, look, there was some sort of directive that was in place. Judges were told A, B, and C. I was simply approaching these agents to explain to them that there's a different way of going about this. My goal here was not to prevent the immigrant from being apprehended.
Former Wisconsin Attorney General and State Supreme Court candidate Brad Schimmel was recently appointed as U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Wisconsin. That's who's prosecuting the case against Dugan. Do you think he's likely taking orders from top officials at the U.S. Department of Justice on how to handle negotiations in this case, and how could that impact a possible resolution?
That's a really, really fascinating question that I just don't know the answer to. I've never been a prosecutor. Obviously, U.S. attorneys on a local level they act at the will of the president. They're appointed that way. So certainly to some degree, there are marching orders that are always given from higher up. In a case like this, there will be, I have no doubt, close attention paid to it by Mr. Schimmel's supervisors within the Department of Justice. But I couldn't tell you what they've said to him or how they're influencing him.
And since you're not a party to this case, you don't know what exactly the government is offering Judge Dugan to plead guilty. But can you explain how plea negotiations work in federal court?
Yeah, so in federal court is a lot different than state court, because in federal court, there's a lot more supervisory approval that has to happen. State court, you can negotiate a deal oftentimes on the spot with whoever's handling the case. In federal court, it's much more formal. There's probably memos going back and forth. There's probably detailed discussions about what would happen at trial on both sides. And ultimately, any resolution that is reached is going to have to go probably to the upper echelons of the Department of Justice, if not Trump himself, before any agreement is reached in this case. It wouldn't surprise me if such a thing had to be signed off on by Pam Bondi, the Attorney General herself, or even Trump.
And this case, of course, has already been very political. Democrats have accused the Trump administration of trying to make an example of Dugan. FBI Director Kash Patel posted a photo on X of Dugan being led out of the courthouse in handcuffs. And the U.S. Department of Homeland Security posted on X that Dugan has taken the term, quote, activist judge to a whole new meaning. How could this impact the process of finding an impartial jury?
So it's always difficult to find an impartial jury on any case. I can speak from experience, having handled any number of high-profile cases, that those cases in particular become even harder. So I think I think the attention that this case has generated will make it difficult. I think the posts you describe by people on the prosecution side are inappropriate. I think that's very rare for me. In fact, it's usually the reverse. It's usually the defense that I see in other cases making comments publicly. 99% of the time, the prosecution is totally tight-lipped, ironclad silence. Here it's been sort of the opposite. The prosecutors have been quiet, but the government officials haven't, and that is going to taint the jury pool for sure.
And so in the same way that you described how plea negotiations work in federal court, how does picking a jury work in federal court?
They're going to bring in 50, 60, 70 people. Those people are going to be marched into the courtroom and sat down. Their judge is going to ask them questions, and the lawyers will have an opportunity to explore through the judge by submitting questions to the judge about people's bias. So if someone has heard about the case, they might be biased. If they are a hardcore Kamala supporter or Trump supporter, they might be biased in some way. So that'll be explored with the jurors in order to try to reduce the number of people sitting on the jury who have strong feelings about the case.
Is jury nullification possible in federal court?
It is, but you can't explicitly argue it. So it's one of those things where, for the listeners who may not know, jury nullification, of course, is the idea that a jury can do whatever it wants. And sometimes a defense a jury will vote not guilty, even if the evidence supports guilt, because jurors don't feel that this defendant should be prosecuted with this crime. I don't see the Judge Dugan case as one where nullification would ever happen. It won't happen. There's zero chance that would happen. You're not going to get 12 jurors who are hardcore pro Hannah Dugan supporters who are going to just nullify this jury. You might get some. But you got to have all 12 in favor of acquittal or not or guilty, and I don't see that happening on the nullification angle.
In order to convict or acquit Dugan, you need a unanimous jury. That's all 12 jurors. Do you anticipate that, or do you think that there could ever be a hung jury in this circumstance?
This won't be a case of a hung jury, in my opinion. I mean, obviously any case could be, but I don't see that happening here. I think this is one where they're going to strike a plea deal and plead it out. But if they don't, I think you're just going to have the jurors being able to make a decision here with the evidence that they're presented with. It doesn't appear to be a complicated case where I could see the jurors having a lot of doubt about what happened.
So Wednesday is going to be the final pretrial in the case. Until when do you think the parties could strike a plea deal?
They could strike a plea deal up to the morning of trial, and that does sometimes happen even in federal court. I think more likely than not, this is not going to be like a last minute, day of trial negotiation. This is one where I think you'll have an idea by the final pretrial if it's going to settle.
Interesting. Anything else you're going to be watching for if this case goes to trial on December 15th?
Yeah, I mean, if it goes to trial, I'm really curious how long it'll last. I can't imagine there's a lot of witnesses on either side. It seems to me like a sort of a 2-day trial or maybe a 3-day trial. But, there's video of what took place. Judge Dugan would presumably testify about what her intent was. I think a trial is fraught with risk for her, and I just think it's very, very unlikely she's going to take that plunge. That, in my opinion.
Interesting. And let's just say, for the sake of argument, that it does go to trial. Do you think that it's going to send a message one way or the other if the jury acquits her or if the jury convicts her?
Yeah, it'll have a profound message one way or the other. And I think there's partisans on both sides who don't care one bit about Judge Dugan, and they simply want the matter to go to trial to serve their own political agendas. But an acquittal would obviously send the message that this was very heavy-handed. A conviction would be disastrous for Judge Dugan, because one thing your listeners may not know is in the federal system, if you are convicted at trial, you lose credit for acceptance of responsibility, and there is a specific sentence enhancement, an increase that is applicable in the guidelines. So a person gets a harsher sentence if they go to trial and lose than if they take a plea deal.
At the same time, you were indicating that you doubt that confinement would necessarily be a component of a sentence if she was to be convicted.
I think if she takes a plea deal, there isn't any scenario where she does even 1 day in jail, because her behavior does not look like the type of behavior where we would typically expect to see someone confined. It's very isolated, very discreet. She has no criminal record. She's a respected judge. To me, the risk here, this isn't like a drug distribution case or a gun case where there's no question the person will do some time. This is one where I think the confinement, if she takes a plea deal, is certainly not going to be anything. If she's convicted at trial, though, that could be different, because if she testifies and they find that she testified falsely and she doesn't get credit for acceptance of responsibility, then it makes the situation a lot worse. So I would revise what I said. I think if she's convicted at trial, certainly the outcome could be very bad for her.
All right, Attorney Tony Cotton, thanks for talking to us about this case.
All right, thanks, Maayan.
That was WUWM's Maayan Silver speaking with criminal defense attorney Tony Cotton. If Milwaukee County Judge Hannah Dugan does go to trial, it's scheduled to start December 15th.
You can find more interviews like this one by visiting WUWM.com/Lake Effect. And while you're there, subscribe to the Lake Effect Spotlight podcast.
Sources and methods, the crown jewels of the intelligence community. Shorthand for how do we know what's real? Who told us? If you have those answers, you're on the inside, and NPR wants to bring you there. From the Pentagon to the State Department to spy agencies, listen to understand what's really happening and what it means for you. Sources and Methods, the new national security podcast from NPR.